David Carter's dream of attending a prestigious academy is shattered when his application is denied for suspicious reasons. But what happens when his father steps in and uncovers a shocking secret about the school? Will justice prevail, or will the truth be buried once again? Let us know where you're watching from today, and don't forget to like and subscribe to follow this incredible story. David Carter sat on the cold, hard bench outside the principal's office, clutching the rejection letter in his trembling hands. The hallway buzzed faintly with the sounds of teachers shuffling papers and students laughing in classrooms, but to David, it was all muted, distant noise drowned out by the thundering of his heartbeat. His mind raced as he read the words on the letter for the 5th time. "We regret to inform you." It didn't make sense. David had worked tirelessly to maintain a perfect GPA, excelling in every subject. He had aced his entrance exam, nailed the essay, and received glowing letters of recommendation. Yet here he was, staring at a flat denial from the prestigious Westbridge Academy. The rejection didn't just sting, it burned, cutting into his sense of worth like a sharp blade. The door to the principal's office creaked open, and a middle-aged secretary with glasses perched on the tip of her nose stepped out. "David Carter, Principal Benson will see you now." David rose, adjusting the collar of his shirt, which suddenly felt too tight. He stepped into the office, where Principal Benson sat behind a massive oak desk, his hands folded neatly. The room reeked of polished wood and authority, with rows of plaques and awards hanging on the walls, all shouting Westbridge's reputation. Benson, a man in his late 50s with a stern expression, motioned for David to sit. David perched on the edge of the chair, his fingers gripping the letter. I just wanted to ask why my application was rejected. I thought..." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "I thought my qualifications were more than enough." Principal Benson leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. He gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind that wasn't warm but rehearsed. "David, we receive thousands of applications each year, and while your credentials are impressive, the competition is fierce." David frowned. "But I checked. The acceptance rate for students with my scores is over 90%. Benson cleared his throat, his eyes darting momentarily to the door, then back to David. "Sometimes decisions come down to more than just academics. We consider various factors: character, cultural fit, and available slots." "Cultural fit?" David's voice sharpened. He wasn't sure what he expected, but the term felt loaded, like it carried an invisible weight that shouldn't be there. "What does that mean?" "It's complicated," Benson replied, his smile fading. "I assure you, this decision wasn't personal." David leaned forward, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "It feels personal, sir. It feels like I'm being told I don't belong." Before Benson could respond, there was a knock on the door, and a staff member poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, Principal Benson, but there's an urgent matter with the board." Benson nodded curtly. "Give me a moment." The staff member lingered, her eyes landing on David briefly before darting back to Benson. "It's about Robert Carter." Benson froze. His expression, so carefully neutral moments ago, flickered with something else. Recognition? Panic? Whatever it was gone in a flash as he straightened his posture. "I'll handle it," he said quickly, waving her off. David's ears perked up at the mention of his father's name. "Wait, what about my dad?" "It's nothing," Benson said too quickly. "Just a matter unrelated to your application." David's curiosity was piqued. His father, Robert Carter, was a well-known philanthropist in the community, but what could he possibly have to do with Westbridge Academy? The pieces didn't fit. "David," Benson continued, leaning forward this time, "I understand how disappointing this must be for you, but I encourage you to apply again next year. Maybe we can revisit your application then." The dismissal in Benson's tone was clear. This wasn't a conversation. It was a carefully managed shutdown. David nodded stiffly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Thank you for your time." As David walked out of the office, his mind buzzed with unanswered questions. He passed by the secretary's desk, where the staff member who'd interrupted the meeting was hurriedly shuffling papers. Her nervous glances toward the principal's door didn't go unnoticed. "Excuse me," David said, stopping by her desk. She looked up, startled. "I overheard you mention Robert Carter." "That's my father. Is everything okay?" The woman hesitated, her eyes scanning the hallway as if to ensure no one else was listening. "You should ask your father," she said in a hushed tone, then quickly returned to her work. David's father was waiting in the car when he exited the building, his tailored suit and polished demeanor a stark contrast to David's disheveled frustration. Robert Carter was a man who commanded attention wherever he went, not just because of his wealth, but because of the weight of his reputation. He had built community centers, funded scholarships, and even contributed to the development of schools across the city. "Hey, kiddo," Robert said as David climbed into the passenger seat. "How'd it go?" David didn't respond immediately. He stared at the rejection letter in his hands before blurting out, "Why did they reject me? I did everything right, Dad. Everything." Robert frowned, his brow furrowing. What did Benson say? David recounted the meeting, emphasizing the phrase cultural fit and the strange reaction to his father's name. Robert listened intently, his jaw tightening as the story unfolded. When David finished, Robert took a deep breath, his fingers gripping the steering wheel. "There's something you should know about Westbridge," he said finally. "Years ago, I made a substantial donation to that school. Millions of dollars, David. It wasn't just for show. I earmarked those funds specifically for scholarships to help kids from underprivileged backgrounds get a shot at the education they deserve." David's eyes widened. "I didn't know that." Robert's gaze darkened. Apparently they'd rather sweep that history under the rug than honor it. But they can't ignore us now. "What are you going to do?" David asked, his voice tinged with a mix of hope and apprehension. Robert smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're going to remind them who we are." As the car pulled out of the school's parking lot, David felt a mix of emotions: anger, confusion, and a glimmer of determination. Whatever was happening at Westbridge Academy, it was bigger than him, and he wasn't going to back down without a fight. The seeds of resistance were planted, and David couldn't shake the feeling that this rejection was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Margaret DeLuca's forced smile lingered for only a moment before she turned back toward the office, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor. Rachel remained planted near the reception desk, her hands resting calmly on the counter, but her presence was magnetic. Guests whispered from behind magazines, curious eyes darting toward her, while the bellhop who had been polishing the brass luggage cart stopped mid-motion to watch. Rachel could feel the weight of their gazes, but she didn't flinch. If she backed down now, it would send a message that she was willing to accept less, to be treated as though she didn't belong. She thought of all the other people who had been subtly or overtly turned away from spaces they deserved to be in, people who had decided it wasn't worth the fight. Not today, she thought. Margaret returned with the older man Rachel had seen earlier. His name tag read William Hargrove, owner. He approached with a polished confidence, the kind of demeanor reserved for people used to having their authority go unquestioned. William extended a hand toward Rachel, but she kept her arms crossed, her calm expression unwavering. "As Coleman, I'm William Hargrove, the owner of the Grand Lux Hotel," he said smoothly. "I understand there's been some miscommunication regarding your reservation." "Miscommunication?" Rachel asked, her tone steady but pointed. "I booked the presidential suite weeks ago. I received confirmation, I paid in advance, and yet I'm being told the room isn't available. That's not a miscommunication. That's a breach of contract." William nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I do apologize for the inconvenience, truly. Unfortunately, the suite was extended to another guest, a long-standing client who requested an additional night. I'm sure you understand these situations can arise." Rachel's gaze didn't waver. "What I understand is that I booked this suite first. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's blatant disrespect." William's smile faltered slightly. I assure you that's not our intention. Intent doesn't matter as much as impact, Mr. Hargrove, Rachel said, her voice firm but calm. Would this same situation have occurred if I didn't look the way I do? Because I can't help but notice that everyone else in this lobby has been greeted with smiles and red carpet treatment, while I've been given excuses. The room seemed to hold its breath. William hesitated, glancing at Margaret, who shifted uncomfortably beside. Miss Coleman, please, let's move to my office to discuss this matter privately, William said. No, Rachel replied. Her voice carried a weight that made everyone in earshot pause. We're not going to handle this in the shadows. This isn't just about me. It's about the principles of your establishment. You can't preach luxury and inclusivity while failing to honor your commitments to guests. Margaret stepped forward, her tone pleading. Mr. Coleman, we're prepared to offer you a complimentary upgrade to one of our premier suites, along with a dining credit to make up for the inconvenience. I think you'll find— Do you hear yourself, Ms. DeLuca? Rachel interrupted, her voice cutting through Margaret's rehearsed placation. You're offering me an upgrade to a room that's objectively inferior to the one I booked. Do you think that's acceptable compensation for being disrespected in front of a lobby full of people? Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but William raised a hand, silencing her. He looked at Rachel carefully, measuring her resolve. Exercise. Miss Coleman, he began, his tone softening. This has clearly upset you, and that was never our intention. We value all our guests equally. No, you don't, Rachel said flatly, because if you did, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would have honored my reservation instead of prioritizing someone else. You wouldn't have allowed your staff to treat me with subtle but unmistakable condescension. You'd be finding a way to fix this instead of defending the indefensible. The room buzzed softly as whispers spread among the onlookers. Rachel turned her attention briefly to a group of well-dressed business people huddled by the lobby cafe. One of them, a woman with blonde hair and an expensive-looking pantsuit, offered Rachel a small nod of support, while others glanced away awkwardly. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved quickly, snapping a picture of the reception desk and the hotel logo in the background. She began typing. What are you doing? Margaret asked, a flicker of panic crossing her face. I'm documenting this experience, Rachel said without looking up. It's amazing how much accountability people find when the world is watching. Margaret and William exchanged alarmed glances. Michelle Coleman, there's no need to escalate things further, William said, his voice losing some of its polish. Let's resolve this in a way that's satisfactory to both parties. Here's what's satisfactory to me, Rachel said, placing her phone down for a moment. Honor my reservation, compensate me for the time I've spent dealing with this nonsense, and make a public commitment to addressing the biases that allow situations like this to occur. William looked flustered for the first time. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the sound of a camera shutter echoed through the lobby. Rachel turned to see a bystander taking a picture of the scene, quickly followed by another guest filming with their phone. The ripple effect had begun. Rachel's own phone buzzed as she saw the likes and retweets piling up on her post. People were already commenting, some outraged, others sharing their own experiences of discrimination in spaces like this. Ms. Coleman, William said, his voice now tinged with desperation. I'm asking you to work with us here. Social media attention can be damaging? Then you should have thought about that before dismissing me, Rachel said coolly. This isn't about revenge or even going viral. It's about making sure no one else has to deal with this. At that moment, a young woman in a hotel uniform approached. She looked nervous, glancing between Rachel and William. Excuse me, sir, she said to William, her voice quiet. There's a news crew outside. They're asking about a story regarding discrimination. William's face paled. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, and Rachel felt a small but satisfying flicker of vindication. I'll handle it, William said sharply, then turned back to Rachel. Miss Coleman, I implore you, let's find a solution here before things spiral further. Rachel looked him straight in the eye, her expression calm but unyielding. "The solution is simple, Mr. Hargrove. Do the right thing." For a long moment William said nothing, his jaw tightening as the weight of the situation settled on him. Finally he turned to Margaret. "Ensure the presidential suite is prepared immediately," he said through gritted teeth. "And arrange for Ms. Coleman's stay to be fully comped. I'll handle the rest." Margaret nodded, her face tight with frustration, and scurried away. William turned back to Rachel, his smile forced but present. "Your suite will be ready shortly," he said. "I hope we can put this unpleasantness behind us." Rachel picked up her phone and met his gaze. "That depends on what you do next, Mr. Hargrove." As William retreated to the back office, Rachel stood tall in the middle of the lobby, the whispers around her fading into background noise. She had won this round, but the battle wasn't over. The fight for respect and equality never really ended. Rachel Coleman stood in the marble-floored lobby of the Grand Lux Hotel, her arms folded as the murmur of onlookers filled the air. Guests whispered among themselves, some nodding in silent agreement with her stance, others simply watching as if witnessing a spectacle they couldn't pull away from. She glanced at her phone. The post she had made about the situation was already gaining traction, with comments of support flooding in. The tension in the room was palpable when Margaret returned. The forced professionalism on her face couldn't mask the nervousness in her eyes. "Miss Coleman, your suite is ready. The staff is preparing it to your specifications, and we will ensure everything is perfect for your stay." Rachel raised an eyebrow, her stance unwavering. "Perfect for my stay? You should be concerned about more than just my stay, Ms. DeLuca." Margaret hesitated, as if unsure how to respond, before giving a tight nod and retreating to her desk. Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up to something much larger than a single hotel reservation. The presidential suite was as opulent as the brochures described. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline, plush furnishings, and a private terrace with its own infinity pool. But Rachel couldn't enjoy any of it yet. She unpacked her suitcase slowly, her thoughts racing as she prepared for the next step. Sitting at the suite's mahogany desk, Rachel opened her laptop and began typing. She drafted a carefully worded post to accompany the video clips and photos she had gathered from the incident downstairs. Her message wasn't about anger or personal vengeance. It was about systemic issues in the hospitality industry, about the subtle biases that led to moments like these. Her post read, "The Grand Lux Hotel incident isn't just about a room. It's about how people of color are often made to feel like they don't belong in spaces that promise luxury for all. This happens every day, in ways big and small, to countless people who don't have the resources to fight back. Today I stood my ground, but this fight is far from over. If you've experienced discrimination in spaces like these, share your story. Let's ensure everyone feels they belong." She attached the video of the confrontation in the lobby and hit post. Within minutes, her notifications began to blow up. Influencers, activists, and even media outlets began resharing her story, amplifying her voice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Rachel stepped onto the terrace to gather her thoughts. She knew this wasn't over. The hotel had reluctantly given her the suite, but the systemic issues that allowed the discrimination to occur were still deeply rooted. A knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. When she opened it, William Hargrove stood there, flanked by Margaret. His expression was a carefully composed mix of regret and professionalism. "Miss Coleman," William began, his voice quieter than it had been in the lobby. "May we come in?" Rachel stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. She crossed her arms as they stood awkwardly in the center of the suite. "I wanted to apologize again," William said, his tone softer now, less rehearsed. "What happened today was unacceptable. We've reviewed the situation and it's clear mistakes were made." "Mistakes," Rachel repeated, her voice steady but pointed. "Is that what we're calling systemic bias now?" William flinched slightly, but to his credit he didn't try to argue. "You're right," he admitted. "And I'd like to do more than apologize. I want to make real changes here. Our training, our policies, even the way we approach customer service, it all needs to be re-examined. Rachel studied him carefully, searching for signs of sincerity. "Why should I believe you?" she asked. "You only came to this conclusion because you were forced to. If there hadn't been cameras or witnesses, you would have let this slide." William nodded, the tension in his shoulders visible. "You're right again. But this is an opportunity to learn. I've already contacted a diversity consultant to help us address these issues head-on. And if you're willing, I'd like to work with you directly. Your insight could help us improve not just here, but across the hospitality industry." Rachel didn't respond immediately. She walked over to the large windows, staring out at the city lights. Part of her wanted to dismiss his offer, to walk away and leave them to figure it out themselves. But another part of her saw the opportunity to create real change. "I'll think about it," she said finally, turning back to face him. "But understand this, I'm not here to make you look good. If I agree, it's because I want to ensure no one else has to go through what I did." William nodded, relief flickering across his face. "That's all I can ask. Thank you, Ms. Coleman." As they left, Rachel felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The fight wasn't over, but she had taken the first. The next morning, Rachel woke to find her social media post had gone viral. National news outlets had picked up the story, and hashtags like "Change in Luxury" and "Stand with Rachel" were trending. People from all walks of life were sharing their own experiences, creating a groundswell of voices demanding accountability. Rachel spent the morning responding to messages of support and organizing her thoughts for the days ahead. She drafted an email to the diversity consultant William had mentioned, outlining her ideas for actionable change. If she was going to be involved, it would be on her terms. Later that afternoon, she held an impromptu press conference on the hotel terrace, with reporters from major outlets eager to hear her story. Rachel spoke with grace and determination, emphasizing that this wasn't just about her. It was about creating a world where no one felt like they didn't belong. "This isn't just about one hotel or one incident," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "It's about challenging the systems and attitudes that allow discrimination to persist. We all deserve to feel welcome, no matter where we are." By the time Rachel checked out of the Grand Lux Hotel 2 days later, the atmosphere had shifted. Employees treated her with the utmost respect, not out of fear, but because her presence had sparked conversations among the staff. Some even thanked her quietly for standing up. As she handed over her keycard at the front desk, Margaret approached her, looking less frazzled than she had the first day. "Mrs. Coleman," she said, her voice softer now, almost earnest. "I just wanted to say thank you. You opened my eyes to things I hadn't seen before." Rachel gave a small smile. "It's not about me, Margaret. It's about what you do with this moving forward." Margaret nodded, her expression thoughtful. As Rachel walked out of the Grand Lux Hotel, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. This wasn't the end, it never truly was, but it was a victory. And for now, that was enough.